The Milky Way was a cosmic zoo, but not the cuddly kind you'd take kids to on a field trip. It was packed with life forms that made Earth's worst nightmares look like Saturday morning cartoons. Forget enlightened aliens offering humanity a seat at the galactic table. Instead, you got squid-faced bureaucrats obsessed with paperwork, merchants with enough eyes to spot a bad deal from 3 star systems away, and soldiers whose weapons were only outmatched by their knack for screwing things up. Among this interstellar circus were the Krathar, a species that evolution had turned into walking death machines. These 8-foot-tall, 4-armed reptilians had scales that could shrug off plasma bolts and claws that sliced through starship hulls like they were cutting birthday cake. Their reputation as the galaxy's apex predators was so fearsome that even the toughest species locked their doors and whispered prayers when Krathar were mentioned. They didn't just hunt. They redefined the concept of food chain with every bloody encounter. Humanity, by contrast, had stumbled into the galactic spotlight like a guy who'd wandered into a black tie gala in flip-flops. First contact came courtesy of a galactic Concorde survey ship that had missed its exit at Proxima Centauri, despite nav systems precise enough to pinpoint a single atom in a nebula. The diplomatic fallout was about as smooth as a gravel smoothie, but 2 centuries later, humans had clawed their way to a respectable spot in the cosmic pecking order. They weren't the strongest or smartest, but they had a secret weapon, a blend of stubborn optimism and sheer unpredictability that made even the most advanced civilizations check their locks twice. The current galactic kerfuffle, calling it a war, would suggest someone had a plan, revolved around the resource-rich nebula Verge, a glittering expanse of planets stuffed with rare minerals and exotic flora. The Galactic Concorde wanted it for scientific exploration, a fancy term for strip mining until the sector looked like a cosmic landfill. The Krathar, however, saw the Verge as their ancestral hunting grounds, a sacred sprawl where they'd stalked prey for millennia. The Concorde's response was to deploy a military force to secure peace, a phrase that ranked right up there with free trial with no strings attached on the list of galactic lies. Caught in the crossfire were human colonies that had sprouted in the Verge decades before anyone important noticed. These settlers had claimed the planets under the universal law of finders keepers, a principle humans defended with the same fervor they applied to backyard barbecues and Super Bowl bets. The Concorde's military, a patchwork of species, in matching uniforms but mismatched priorities, rolled in with orders to clear out the Krathar and pave the way for science ships that looked suspiciously like mining rigs with a fresh coat of paint and some test tube decals. So there you had it. Humans defending their homes, Krathar protecting their hunting grounds, and the Concorde's forces bumbling through orders while trying not to become lunch. It was a recipe for a disaster that future historians would call entirely avoidable if anyone had just picked up a damn phone. Just another day in the galaxy's endless sitcom. Dr. Riley Callahan, xenobiologist, thrill-seeker, and owner of what her colleagues called a reckless disregard for personal safety, hadn't planned on landing on Verge 7. Then again, Riley's life was a series of unplanned adventures, from that incident with a diplomat's pet and a malfunctioning hover drone to the time she accidentally started a bar fight on Rigel 4 over a misinterpreted drinking game. With PhDs in xenobiology and behavioral ecology, Riley had built a career studying the galaxy's deadliest creatures, specializing in decoding their communication patterns. Her peers called her the beast tamer, though never to her face, unless they wanted a 20-minute rant about the nuances of interspecies signaling. At 5'8", with a tangle of auburn hair perpetually tied back with a bandana and a collection of scars that read like a roadmap of bad decisions, Riley didn't look like someone who'd go toe-to-claw with the galaxy's top predators. But her confident swagger and the glint in her hazel eyes screamed, "I've survived worse and I'm not impressed." Her presence on Verge 7 was listed as an ecological assessment, a bureaucratic cover for, "We need someone nuts enough to catalog the wildlife on this death world before we blow it to hell." The research grant came from a shady subsidiary of a corporation tied to the Concorde's Resource Extraction Bureau, a fact Riley wasn't naive about. But the chance to study undocumented predators was too good to pass up, and if she could keep corporate greed from wiping out unique species, all the better. Her base was a prefab research station perched on the edge of a jungle the locals called the Screamwood, a name Riley found overly dramatic but annoyingly accurate. She'd been on planet for 4 months, amassing a database of creatures. That would make her old professors either proud or terrified, probably both. What Riley didn't know as she geared up for another day in the field was that her knack for talking to monsters was about to become a lot less theoretical. Riley's morning started with her datapad screeching like a banshee, an alert that would have sent any sane person diving for cover. Her sensors had picked up a massive biosignature 3 kilometers west of her station, moving erratically. The readings didn't match anything in her database, which meant either a groundbreaking discovery or a busted sensor. Faced with the choice between science and tech support, Riley grabbed her field kit, a backpack stuffed with modules, scanners, and enough protein bars to survive a week, and headed out with the enthusiasm of someone who'd never heard of better safe than sorry. The Screamwood was a biological nightmare, a tangle of violet vines and glowing ferns that seemed designed to make every step a lawsuit waiting to happen. After an hour of cursing thorny undergrowth and dodging spore clouds that smelled like regret, Riley's bioscanner led her to a rocky clearing. The readings were screaming now, but the area looked empty. Great. Another wild goose chase, she muttered, just as the ground shook. The camouflage was so flawless she almost missed it, a shimmer like heat rising off a desert road. Then it moved, and the outline snapped into focus. A Krathar, 12 feet of scaled four-armed terror, its claws retracted, but still glinting like polished steel. This wasn't just any Krathar. The intricate spine ridges marked it as a prime, one of their elite hunters, and it was in bad shape. Black ichor oozed from a gash in its torso, and its breathing was a ragged wheeze. A plasma burn had scorched its scales, exposing raw tissue. The Krathar locked eyes with Riley, its vertical pupils glowing amber with a mix of pain and defiance. "Well, damn," Riley whispered, her scientific curiosity temporarily outpacing her survival instincts. "You're a hell of a specimen, and someone's tried to turn you into a pincushion." The creature growled, a low rumble that vibrated her bones, but it didn't attack. Riley stood frozen, her mind racing through Krathar, behavioral studies. It could have gutted her by now if it wanted to. The fact that she was still breathing suggested it was either too weak or, more intriguingly, curious. Before she could decide her next move, the whine of engines cut through the jungle. Military transports, Concord issue, probably packing. Plasma rifles like the one that had wounded the Krathar. "They're hunting you," Riley realized, her voice barely audible. The Krathar's scales rippled, its body tensing as it tried to rise, only to collapse with a frustrated snarl. The engines grew louder, landing nearby. Within minutes, they'd find her and the wounded predator, which the Concorde had labeled a priority threat. Riley had about 20 seconds to make a choice that could end her career, or her life. The smart move was to step back and let the military handle it. The right move was a lot messier. As boots crunched through the undergrowth and voices barked, orders Riley made her call. It wasn't the smart one, but it was hers. "Guess we're both in the shit now," she told the Krathar, pulling a medjol pack from her kit. "Let's see if we can't screw up their day." The Concorde's 19th Tactical Brigade crashed into the clearing like a frat party hitting a library. 10 soldiers in sleek exosuits, their plasma rifles humming with enough juice to level a city block, fanned out in a semicircle. Leading them was Commander Varkas, a Zorathian whose insectoid frame, think a 7-foot cockroach with an attitude, made him look like he was born to ruin someone's day. His mandibles clicked through a translator, projecting a voice that could curdle milk. "Civilian, step aside," Varkas snapped, his compound eyes glinting. "You're obstructing a military operation." Riley stood her ground, arms spread, the Krathar behind her. She'd slapped Megol on its wound, slowing the bleeding, but the creature was still weak, its breathing shallow. "Actually," she shot back, "you're crashing my research site, which is protected under Concord Science Directive 17C. She had no clue if that directive existed, but she delivered it like she'd written the damn thing. Varkas's mandibles twitched, a Zorathian tell for irritation. "That creature has killed 23 of my troops across 4 systems. It's a Class A threat. Move, or we'll move you." 23? Damn, that's a resume, Riley said, tilting her head. But if one injured Krathar took out that many of your guys, maybe you need better training, or better aim. A murmur rippled through the soldiers, their exosuits shifting uncomfortably. The Krathar made a sound Riley swore was a chuckle, low and guttural. Varkas stepped closer, his armor whirring. Dr. Callahan, your research clearance doesn't cover harboring enemies. We know your funding traces back to our resource bureau. You're on our payroll. Well, that was a gut punch. Riley filed it under deal with later and doubled down. This Krathar's defending its territory from invaders, she said, loud enough for the whole squad to hear. It's injured, not a threat. Killing it violates at least 5 species protection laws I could recite blindfolded. It's a predator that'll kill again, Varkas countered, his rifle humming. So am I, came a voice. Not audible, but a sharp pressure in Riley's skull, like nails on a mental chalkboard. The soldiers froze, weapons snapping up. Varkas's armor locked into combat mode. Did it just... a soldier stammered. Yeah, it talks, Riley cut in, hiding her shock at the telepathic voice. Which makes it sentient under Concord Law Article 9. Killing it without a trial's a war crime. You want that on your record, Commander? The standoff stretched, the air thick with tension. Riley felt the Krathar's breath behind her, stronger now as the Medjol worked. Varkas's eyes reflected her defiance in 1,000 tiny lenses. You have 1 hour, he hissed. Prove its value, or we end this. Clear? Riley nodded, biting back a snarky reply. As the soldiers set up a perimeter, she turned to the Krathar. Well, big guy, we've got 60 minutes to not die. Got any bright ideas? The Krathar, now semi-upright, fixed Riley with amber eyes that seemed to see through her. The Medjol had stabilized its wound, but it was still a far cry from fighting. Shape. Telepathy, huh? Riley said, crouching to its level. That's a neat trick. Not in any of the files, though I guess most researchers didn't live long enough to jot it down. Not telepathy, the creature's thought voice grated, like gravel in her mind. Neural resonance. Your kind speaks with noise. We shape thoughts directly. Efficient, Riley said, impressed. Got a name, or should I stick with terrifying death lizard? A wave of amusement hit her, sharp and dry. I am Vraxis, Blade of the Crimson Hunt. Your tongue cannot form it. Call me Blade. Blade it is, Riley said, smirking. We've got about 50 minutes before Commander Bugboss tries to turn us into a cautionary tale. Any thoughts on not becoming trophies? Blade's scales rippled. I could slay them when my strength returns. Tempting, but that'll just bring more guns, Riley said, keeping her cool despite the casual murder plan. We need a deal that keeps everyone breathing. Why are you here fighting alone? Blade's eyes narrowed. This is our sacred ground. Your kind and the conquered invade, stealing our prey, our lands. I defend what is ours. Riley glanced at the soldiers' perimeter, their rifles still trained on them. The conquered wants minerals. You want your hunting grounds. There's gotta be a compromise. What if we set up a preserve? Your people keep most of the verge for hunting, and the conquered gets limited mining zones under strict rules. Blade went still, his claws twitching. You propose alliance with prey? I propose not dying, Riley corrected. The Concord gets their rocks, you keep your jungle, and we all live to bitch about the paperwork. For a long moment, Blade was silent. Then, in a move that nearly stopped Riley's heart, he lowered his massive head, a gesture of respect. You think like a hunter, human. His thought voice rumbled, laced with grudging admiration. There may be wisdom in your weak form, Riley exhaled, her pulse racing. Great. Now we just need to sell this to the trigger-happy bug and his goons. Riley strode toward Varkas's perimeter, Blade looming behind her, his wound still visible but his presence commanding. The Meggle had worked miracles, and Blade moved with a predator's grace, his scales glinting in the dim light. The soldiers tensed, their rifles twitching, but Varkas raised a claw to hold fire. Commander, Riley called, stopping just outside the perimeter. I've got a proposal that gets you your minerals without starting a war. Varkas's mandibles clicked, skeptical. One Krathar doesn't make a war. This one's a diplomat for the Crimson Hunt, Riley said, praying Blade wouldn't call her bluff. He's offering to negotiate territorial rights instead of, turning this jungle into a buffet. A soldier coughed, possibly stifling a laugh, but Varkas's glare shut him up. The conquered doesn't negotiate with predators, the commander said flatly. Which explains your stellar track record, Riley shot back, gesturing at the squad. How many troops have you lost chasing this guy? And he's not even full prime yet. Total bullshit, but the soldier's uneasy shifts told her it landed. What's your proposal? Varkas asked, his voice sharp. Riley grinned, the kind of grin that had started bar fights and won grants. The Crimson Hunt keeps 75% of the Verge. Jungles, hunting grounds, all of it. The Concord gets 25% for mining, focused on the northern ridges with strict environmental rules. Both sides agree on boundaries, and nobody gets eaten. Why would we agree when we can just kill it? Varkas asked, his eyes narrowing. Because Blade's already signaled his clan, Riley lied, smoothly. If he doesn't return with a deal, they send the big guns, hunters who don't bother with warnings. You want to be the guy who started that fight? Blade growled, a deep, bone-rattling sound that made the soldiers flinch. Varkas's mandibles twitched, doubt creeping in. You're bluffing. Am I? Riley raised an eyebrow. You know, Jack, about Krathar neural comms. I'm the only scientist who's talked to one and kept all my limbs. Want to bet your career on it? Varkas's armor whirred as he shifted, clearly running the math. I'll consult command, he said finally. You and the creature stay here. Any contact, any movement, and we're done. Fair enough, Riley said, hiding her relief. As the soldiers withdrew, she turned to Blade. Nice growl. You almost had me convinced. You lie well, Blade's thought voice said, tinged with humor. But do you truly believe my clan will honor this? Riley hesitated. You got backup nearby, right? Blade's eyes glinted. 5 hunts are within reach. They do not negotiate. Riley's jaw dropped. You actually have a clan? Shit. I was half making that up. Did you think I fought alone? Blade's mental tone was smug. Your gamble is bold, Prey, Riley grinned. Well, that's a hell of a trump card. The 48-hour deadline stretched into 96, bureaucracy moving, slower than a DMV on a holiday weekend. Riley and Blade didn't sit idle. With his wound nearly healed, Blade led her deeper into the screamwood, away from the Concord sensors. The soldiers grumbled, but didn't follow. Tracking a Krathar in its home turf was like chasing a ghost in a fog bank, and nobody was eager to volunteer. Your soldiers lack courage, Blade observed, gliding through the jungle with ease. They're crunching numbers, Riley said, panting to keep up. Everything's a cost-benefit analysis to them. Welcome to Concord logic. The 5 hunts Blade mentioned were family units, each with 4 to 6 Krathar, from grizzled primes to juveniles learning the ropes. Their territories spanned the jungle, linked by scent markers and neural pulses. Riley's first meeting with them was a near disaster. A juvenile mistook her for lunch until Blade's roar stopped it cold. The neural exchange that followed gave Riley a migraine, but Blade translated, "They doubt your plan but will hear you." Awesome, Riley groaned, rubbing her temples. Nothing like skeptical death machines to spice up a diplomatic mission. Using her scanners and Blade's knowledge, they mapped the screamwood, pinpointing hunting grounds, nesting sites, and migration paths. Riley overlaid geological data from her station, identifying mineral-rich zones with low ecological value. The result was a proposal that let the Concord mine without gutting the Krathar's home, a tightrope balance that required convincing predators to tolerate intruders and bureaucrats to care about more than profit. On day 6, Varkas returned, with a Concord envoy, a silver named Thalin, whose vine-like limbs and emerald skin screamed, "I'm too pretty for this shit." "Dr. Callahan," Thalin said, their voice like wind chimes, "you claim to represent the Krathar?" "Blade's people?" "Yeah," Riley said, Blade at her side, his presence making the soldiers twitch. "We've got a proposal that keeps everyone happy." Thalin scanned the datapad Riley offered, their 4 eyes narrowing. "This is reasonable," they said, surprised. "You suggest coexistence? When the alternative's a bloodbath?" Yeah, Riley said, smirking, unless you want to explain a Crathar war to your bosses. The negotiations were brutal, but productive. The Conquered saw a prolonged fight as too costly, and the Crathar, via Blade, agreed some compromise was better than annihilation. By nightfall, they had a deal. The Conquered got 20% of the Verge for mining, with strict oversight. The Crathar kept 80%, their boundaries sacred. Thalon sealed the accord, calling it historic but pending ratification. Riley and Blade exchanged a look. Paper didn't mean shit in the Screamwood. The Crathar ruled here, and only a fool would cross their lines. A year later, the Verge Accord was official, though the Crathar didn't bother naming it. Treaties were prey nonsense. The Conquered mined their zones, watched like hawks by Timmy, xenobiologists trained in Crathar behavior, a program Riley co-designed. It was a hit with thrill-seeking scientists who thought "don't get eaten" was a fun job perk. Incidents were rare, usually miners straying past markers and learning why Crathar don't bluff. Riley stayed on Verge 7, her field station now a hub for Crathar research. Her papers on neural resonance communication were galactic must-reads, though academics scoffed at her methods. "They think I've gone feral," she told Blade one evening watching a juvenile Crathar stalk prey from a cliff. "My last review said I've got predator fixation syndrome," Blade's mental snort echoed. "Your kind fears what it cannot tame," says the guy who signed a treaty with a glorified ape, Riley teased, grinning. Their partnership sparked ripples. Other sectors tried similar deals, some working, others ending in blood. The Concord's Xeno Relations Bureau opened a predator diplomacy division, though volunteers were scarce. Human colonies began favoring coexistence over conquest, a slow shift in colonial thinking. The idea that not every planet needed to be Earth 2.0 was gaining ground, one hard-won accord at a time. "We've changed things," Riley said, the jungle glowing under twin moons. "For better or worse." "Change is not good or bad," Blade rumbled. "It is. Only prey fears it." "For a death machine, you're pretty deep," Riley said, laughing. "And for prey, you are wise," Blade replied, his mental tone warm. The Screamwood pulsed with life. Hunters hunted and everything in between. Conquered ships mined under watchful eyes, and two species coexisted, not in peace but in something fiercer, truer. It wasn't diplomacy by suits and signatures, but by grit, respect, and one stubborn human who stood between soldiers and a predator, rewriting the rules of the wild. Like the Wild Heart Accord, support our channel for more epic galactic tales. Subscribe, share, and join our community to dive into the wild with us.